Let's do this. Oh, here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of A Voice in the Hollow. I am your host, Miguel Ortega. This is my co-host, Tran. And today we have a special guest, a recent graduate from Gnomon, one of the best students I've seen come out of there, Dakota Smith. So give me a second here. So
Hey guys.
Dakota, hey, how's it going, Dakota?
It's great. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you here. And Dakota helped us a lot on the Houdini side of the project. So it's a couple shots that needed special detail, special love on the Houdini side, and Dakota jumped in and helped make it possible. So we thought we'd invite him to come in and show what he did. So
Hey, thank you so much.
we have a bunch of fans on there. So.
Yeah, we can see the chat.
Oh my gosh. Hi guys. Thank you guys so much for showing up too. I really appreciate it.
You don't get this kind of fandom, Tran.
No, we don't get any of that.
Only my
Oh.
mom likes in.
Yeah, it's just sometimes she does show up.
Yeah. So yeah, cool. So let's go over some of the stuff you helped out on. So in particular, we have a little chase scene here. Let me just play it real quick.
Sweet.
All right, so there we go. So that scene right there at the very end, we have our poor little guy getting stabbed to death. And
Kind of nice if you scrub it a little bit because when you play it,
yeah, it's
It's
really pixelated. I
yeah.
know.
you guys can see like the high quality version when it's done.
Yeah. But you can see as the anteater hits the floor, it's actually leaving a mark on the floor and it's kicking off all these little pebbles. We finally got all this stuff to actually work properly just last night. So we've been struggling with it on our end, not on Dakota's end. He actually turned this in a while ago, but we had to get everything to work correctly. And it's not that we didn't know how to do it, but there was a big limitation, which we're going to talk about in terms of the Alembic file sizes. Still a big issue in Unreal, but we'll talk about how we got that in. But yeah, you can see it's pretty cool. Like as it's kicking around, it is leaving a trail. We probably want to try to push that out a little bit more because I still don't feel like you see it enough. But yeah, it's there. It's just yeah, we have to figure out how to pull it out a little bit more. But there's definitely a lot of stuff going on there. And then the pebbles are kicking around, which are pretty sweet. So yeah, so Dakota, if you want to show on your end what you did to get to this, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Screen.
oh sweet. Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, so you were kind of talking about how there you want to like accentuate it a little bit and make it a little bit more noticeable. And so that is totally cool because that's one of the things that I love the most about Houdini is and sort of the mindset and workflow that you got to be in there is that everything is like scalable and controllable. So here in just a sec, I'm gonna walk through all the different sort of methods that I approached this problem with, and the one that we ended up landing on, and the one that ended up in the final thing, super controllable and literally just be a push of a button to make that change, which is something that I'm a really big fan of with Houdini. Yeah, so great. So again, thank you all for having me on the show tonight. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so let's talk about this anteater shot. There there are three main components to the shot. There was first the ground deformation shot. Then on top of that, there's the layer of grains, and lastly was a little bit of blood spillage coming out of the side of the anteater. And so let's get started with the with the ground deformation portion of it. So here we have our, it's loading back right now. I'm gonna zoom into this really fast. But yeah, as you can see, there's a little bit of a divot where the anteater kind of drags around in there. Yeah, so this is what I ended up settling on. But this one was such a cool effect because there were so many different ways to approach it at the beginning. And so when you guys came to me with this shot, I tried a bunch of different things before landing on what it ended up becoming. Um, so this was the very first thing that I tried, and sorry that it's so fast. I only got a little bit out, but this was my first attempt at it, and I did this using Flip, and Flip is Houdini's. It's liquid solver essentially, and it really shines. It's a great solver, and super cool stuff comes out of it. But it typically shines when working with large scale, sort of flowing and splashing liquid sims. So things like oceans, rivers, waterfalls, stuff like that. Um, but it just kind of like the first idea that I had when approaching this shot was maybe I could make like a really thick sort of like muddy liquid sim and run the little guy through it. And this was the first go at it. And the reason that it's so short, and here let me maybe pause on one of these later frames in here. The reason it's so short is because it just took an incredibly long time to sim through. I was just creating this little patch of liquid particles and then having the anteater kind of run through it. And
So was
and
it taking long because it likes bigger patches or something?
um Not really in this case. This was a decent size for it. Like scale wise, it was totally fine. It has a harder time with like smaller scale things, like if we wanted to pour like wine into a glass, it could totally do it. Like it's very capable of it, but it would require a lot more work on the user end, to get it working.
Okay.
So in this case, it wasn't necessarily a matter of scale. In fact, scale might have even slowed it down in this case because this is only a little portion of it, and obviously the anteater, he ends up like moving way past what I have set up here. But this thing right here probably took about an hour and a half to sim on its own, and I didn't even get a second out.
Wow.
It was primarily slow because I mean, it could have been something in the way that I set it up, but between the collisions, the kind of I know I said it works well on large scales, but the scale of this, how like much distance it would have covered, as well as I think I mentioned it was viscous before, but all that, it really slowed it down. And it looks like taffy, too. So like a
Yeah, it
little
feels
bit
more
like
like mud, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So right away I kind of figured that this wouldn't really be a viable approach because it wasn't super controllable and it was just taking way too long. So there's no way I could get, any sort of decent iteration out of it. Um, but it did have some good things. Like, for example, one thing that I really liked from this was it's very subtle, and I don't know how well it shows up on the stream, especially since it's moving so fast. But as the anteater kind of moves into it, it creates kind of like this leading edge to it right here, which was kind of nice. And that's something that we'll be talking about pretty extensively here in a little minute. Because that was a whole nother problem to solve in the end. So that was the first approach. But like I said, very quickly realized that it wasn't going to be scalable. It wasn't going to be iteratable. So I moved on, and it just didn't look right. So I moved on to this, and this one is, I'm so sorry, this is probably going to be impossible to see on the stream with how fast it's going and all the sort of the moiring effect going on here. But
See it okay.
yeah, but this one, so the next step was I tried a purely grains approach. So I just took the anteater and I ran him through this big old pile of just grains. And it was okay. Like we got some cool results with it. Like I really like the stuff that gets kicked up over here and all that. It could have been very cool. But again, it suffered from the same issue. In that it was incredibly slow. In order to keep it from exploding, like as soon as the anteater touched it, I had to really crank up the simulation substeps, which is like how many times it recalculates in between each frame. I had to crank that up big time, and as a result, it slowed down a lot. Um, but otherwise, we got some cool details in here. Like again, I'm sorry if it's really hard to see on the stream, but like all the places where it does actually interact, like we got some cool detail in there. But again, it wasn't exactly what we were looking for, and it would have been really hard to iterate on and control, I guess, at a granular level. No pun intended. Um, so that's how we kind of ended up on this last one, which is um completely different. It's not really a simulation at all, and sorry, the grains are kind of covering up the ground deformation in this one, but this the way that we ended up the one that we ended up going with, and the setup that I ended up using was not a simulation whatsoever, minus the grains are a simulation, but the ground deformation itself, that's essentially just using Houdini's procedural modeling tools, um, to just get that indent in the ground.
It's just
So
basically pushing the vertices down.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's crack open Houdini, and let's talk about how that was done. So first things first was I brought in the ground mesh, and I had to cut it up because the mesh itself was huge. So I cut out a little square where that kind of encapsulated the whole area where the anteater was going to be dragging along. Did a little bit of cleanup on the mesh just because I found later down, I don't know what it was, but Houdini just really wanted me to divide it and make it all triangles in there. I don't even remember what the issue was, but just needed to divide it up a little bit. And then yeah, so let's go down the main
So it's
deform.
just doing like a regular triangulate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and maybe it was like an issue with like a moving vertice or something like that, or like an n-gon that it didn't like, which shouldn't really make sense because um, Houdini can handle n-gons just fine. But it this one was just for like I guess quote unquote cleaning up the topology, because one of my solvers later down the line, I guess, didn't like something that was going on with it. I never found out what the actual issue was. I just found that this fixed the issue.
Yeah.
Um, So, this right here is it's a solver, and that's kind of a vague term because Houdini has a lot of solvers. It has like pyro solver for smoke and fire. It has flip solver for liquids, vellum solver for cloth, hair, and all that. But this one is just the solver, and I like to think of it as Houdini in 4D because essentially it just gives you access to all of Houdini's like. Um, Regular operators, so anything that you do to objects to manipulate geometry, it gives it to you over time as well, and it's one of my favorite tools to work with, and it's how I approach pretty much every effect in this scene. um, so yeah, so this is kind of where the base magic happens. It it so I input the ground geometry. So okay, sorry, let's back up a sec. So it has two main inputs. The first one is the ground geometry right here, and the other one is our anteater geometry. Oop, wrong one. There we go. Our anteater. And actually, it isn't the anteater itself. I converted the anteater itself to a volume, and we'll go into that in just a sec why. But yeah, so those are the two main inputs. The first one is the ground geometry, and then the second one is a volume version of the animated anteater. So if we go inside, if you just create a regular solver, it comes empty. So this one, which is why I love it, it's because it gives you like a ton of control, and you basically have to build it from the ground up every time, which means that it's incredibly flexible, and it you can use it for so many different things. In this case, we were just using it to deform some geometry, which was really cool. Um, yeah, so there are two main kind of steps that happen in here. It's this one and this one, and I wrote myself some notes over here to remember because this one is fine, but some of the later ones that we ended up doing, they ended up getting pretty complicated. And looking back on them, like so many months later, I had to like refigure out what I did to make it work. but yeah, so the way that the SOP solver kind of works, and I don't think I'm going to explain this too terribly well. So let me know if anybody has any questions or anything like that. But it essentially, this right here, this purple node right here, it takes the output of the solver from the previous frame and brings it up and lets you access it. So what this means is you can have a bunch of things happen over time, a bunch of changes over time. And in this case, that's great, but I don't use it in the, so okay, sorry, I need to back up a sec. So the way that Houdini works is there's like a main stream. Anything going into like the first input of anything with multiple inputs, that's going to be what comes out of the second input. And so in this case, I have just the regular ground geometry. And if I scrub through here, nothing is going to happen because it's just the ground geometry from before the solver. So it's the same as if I was just out here outside of the solver and just kind of scrubbing. So in order to
So
get
the ground is input 1.
yes, exactly, yeah. So it's the thing that's going to carry through all the way. So in order to get, so basically down here we make all these changes or whatever, but in order to get those changes to stick around every single frame, I need to take the output of the previous frame and transfer the attributes that I want. So in this case, it's P, which is position. It's Houdini's like global attribute for position, as well as this attribute that I myself created called sample. And we'll go over that here in just a sec. So this first step is essentially assuring that everything that happens to the geometry throughout the course of the solver on any given frame, it gets applied back to the main geometry that we want to manipulate. So that's what that part does. And then this one is the one that actually makes the changes. So the first input is the ground from the last frame, essentially. And the second input is the Anteater volume.
So the
So
volume is basically like a shell of the high-res geometry.
yeah,
I'm assuming it simplifies the calculation because it's all just like a decimated version.
that could be one reason that I would use it in something like a smoke sim or liquid sim or something like that. But in this case, I wanted to turn it into a geometry because what I'm doing, or sorry, into a volume. So this particular volume is an SDF, sign distance field, and essentially what that means is that there are VDBs, they exist within, or sorry, volumes, they exist within a container, and some of those containers, or some of those, sorry, the container itself is filled with voxels, from like start to finish. It's filled with voxels, and some of those voxels have like value to them, like they might have a density value of 1, for example, and some of them might have a density value of 0. So each voxel stores information on them that we can access. And so the reason that and then an SDF is a type of volume that basically describes how, like, signed distance field, signed means like either positive or negative, and then distance field is like how far away, like inside or outside of a surface, any particular voxel is. So for example, if I were to look at one of the, like, not actually look at it, but if I was to go inside the Anteater and pick a specific voxel, it would have a negative value to it, and that's how we know that it's inside the surface of the geometry. And then if we
So
were to take,
is there actually stuff inside the Anteater?
yeah, here, let me see if I can, I think it's VDB, it's one of the, visualize tree, I believe. Let's see if this one will do it. I haven't actually used this before, so okay, yeah. Yeah, so here we see all of, let's see, solid boxes, and then wireframe boxes. Oh wait, here, maybe we'll do this. Wireframe. Let's see if this makes it any easier to visualize. Yeah. Okay. So the blue here are like all of. Okay. So VDBs are a type of volume that are awesome because they only really store, to my understanding, of course, I could be wrong, or somebody could definitely explain it better, but they only store information where they kind of need to, which makes them very memory efficient, and that's awesome. Um, but essentially, so all these like wireframe blue areas are all like the active areas of the volume. So any of these have like some sort of information in them, whether it be like they have a value of 1 or they have a value of 0 or whatever. But yeah, so if we go inside here, this is, sorry, let me explain what this node is doing. So this node, from my understanding, is essentially visualizing the voxels of the volume as polygons. Just it's a for visualization purposes. So each one of these little cubes represents one of, like, the small geometry cubes represents one of the voxels of our volume. So yeah, if we go inside here, let me kind of, there there are some voxels inside. It's mostly empty, but there are some inside that we can still read values from.
I see.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Cool.
so the reason in particular that I chose to convert the Anteater to an SDF was so that way I had access to these negative values that represented places inside the Anteater. So basically, and because that helps in two ways. One, it tells us like what's intersecting with the anteater at any given time, and it also kind of gives us a value to it, because like it could be like negative zero point 0.1 or negative zero point 0.3 if it's deeper inside, right? So it tells us like if it's shallower and deeper. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm sampling this volume using one of Houdini's functions called volume sample. Um, and it's returning the value. So if I let's go over to my spreadsheet over here. Yeah, great. So I think I'm, yeah, interesting. So oh yeah, because it's not intersecting yet. But if I go down here, it might not cook. It might, but it might not. No, okay, it's not going to cook. That's okay. But if I take a look at,
What when you say cook, what does cook mean?
right, sorry. So cooking is like kind of running the simulation, I suppose. It's calculating all the values before it up to the frame that we're currently on, because all this is essentially for like I said, this isn't technically a simulation, but it still does require
Yeah,
information from each prior frame to get where we're at.
it's still figuring stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I want it to cook, I should go out here. I'm gonna go to frame 1070, and we might get some better values. Oh, interesting. I wonder why they're turning red. Um, Let me cook this right here. Okay, great. Yeah, so we can. It's kind of hard to see because the normals are a little messed up. I end up calculating them again later on in the tree, but so that's why it isn't super apparent where everything is right now. But if so, we have this node selected, and we s- we are using the volume sample function to sample the volume to see if it's a positive or negative value, and I'm storing that to an attribute. Houdini is all about attributes. It's really, at the end of the day, it's just creating and manipulating attributes, to create these systems and stuff like that. So I'm storing the value of this SDF to this attribute I'm calling sample. And if we take a look at some of the values, oh man, it really doesn't want to cook, but that's okay.
It usually
Uh,
all goes to hell the minute you're being recorded and
yeah,
broadcast. That's what
I'm
happens.
sure it does.
Yeah. So
Oh
don't worry
man.
about it.
But as we can see, and I think it must still be taking it from the first frame or something like that. Oh no, because it's pushing it out of the way. That's why. Okay, never mind. I understand. But so we get a positive value, meaning that the surface of the ground itself, the ground plane that we're deforming, is currently outside of the anteater. It's not intersecting, and the reason that it does that is because right here, in this step, I am pushing the y value of position to, I am adding the value of sample, and so that means if it samples the volume and it comes back negative, like let's say it's negative zero point 0.3, it's going to push it down negative 0.03 units in space, and it's no longer going to be intersecting with the geometry anymore. So that's how I did the base ground deformation effect. But there are a couple more things to it. Um, yeah. So I do that, and then as you can see, my tree over here kind of branches off into a couple of different areas, and that's because while this was fine, if I drop a normal node, we'll be able to see it a little bit better. Let me do that really fast. Yeah, so that's what that's what it looks like straight out of the solver, and it looks okay. Like obviously we can see there's some deformation going on, but it's very sharp. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe not. At the time I thought that maybe it needs to like be smoothed out a little bit. But then speaking of smoothness, it's also like just incredibly smooth in here. Like we lose any and all detail. So from there, I decided that we probably need to do a little bit of post processing on this, which is one of the reasons why I'm a really big fan of doing this as opposed to like the flip solver or the grain solver, is because while you can do a bunch of post processing on them, you wouldn't get sort of like this level of control unless you did it this way. At least in my eyes. I, I always talk to people about simulating and stuff like that, and they're often really surprised to hear that I don't like simulating at all. That sounds really counterintuitive, especially based on what I do. But anytime I'm approached with a problem, especially now, I like to approach it in a way like I avoid simulating at all costs. If I can do it a way like this, where I have a little bit more control over it, I will definitely do it in a heartbeat. Um, Anyways, yeah. So post processing it. So the first thing that I did was. Um, I dropped down another solver because I wanted to, while here it was actually deforming it, it wasn't telling us where the anteater, like we don't have an attribute that represents where the anteater is like touching the ground at any given time. So I kind of wanted to generate that because I knew that we would need it. So I plugged the output of our first solver, which has the deformed geometry, into a second um, solver. Again, the second input is the anteater volume. And so in here, it's two things. This is the same thing as the last time. It's just transferring all the attributes from the previous frame. And then this one is doing another volume sample, kind of like the last time. But instead of pushing around the geometry, I'm just storing whether or not the anteater is near the ground or like touching the ground in an attribute called hit. And if we visualize that, let me visualize the attribute really fast. It doesn't look like anything yet, but then if we move further into the simulation, yeah, we see we have, let me go start little anteater here. We have a little bit of a representation of where our anteater has touched. So we get this nice little trail on the ground. And again, that's just information that we're going to use later down the road
At
here. But
this point, is that geometry or is that a texture?
It's geometry. So all this is geometry, but what I'm visualizing right now is an attribute on geometry. So Houdini is all about attributes, like I mentioned, and so it has some really cool tools for
But
visualizing
but
attributes.
that blue, the blue there, that's not another like layer of geometry. It's just kind of coloring the same geometry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
It's coloring the geometry based on the value of an attribute. So if I go into our oh, I don't think it liked that. There we go. This is one of the menus that lets you it's the visualizer menu, so it lets you set up visualizers for different things. And in this case, I just have like a ramped color for the attribute that I called hit, that this solver is sort of generating for us. Like I said, all of Houdini is just attributes. We have attributes for position. We have this attribute that I created, hit. um, it goes from 0 to 1. It's really not wanting to show the whole range of values today. That's very strange, but that's okay. And then we also have sample from previous. There we go. There's our negative values that we wanted to see earlier. Um, but yeah, so this is just it's like coloring the each point on the geometry. Let me bring up the points. So these are all the points in the geometry. It's just coloring each one of them based on
So it's like
their
just like a vertex color at this point.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So let me turn off the visualization over. No, let's keep it on. We're gonna need it. Okay. So I do a couple things here. First thing I do is expand the attribute a little bit, so that way it just kind of I get a little bit more of an edge there.
Oh,
Um,
so at this
yeah,
point, it's just figuring out, okay, this geometry is touching this geometry,
yeah,
uh, and now you have to basically give it the depth.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but in this case, like I said, we're not pushing it down in this case because we already did that over here. I'm just using this information to find out where the anteater has been, essentially, just
Okay.
because what I'm going to. Oh, whoops, wrong button. What I'm going to do, so like I said, I just do a little bit of like blending on that information. But I wired into this, and this is what's called a VOP. It's a VEX operator. VEX is it's the native language in Houdini. It's kind of like a hybrid between I believe C and Python. But basically, what I'm doing in here and is I am the goal is to, if I disable this, it doesn't show too much in this one, but I'm essentially just kind of blending the area where the anteater interacts with the ground with the original ground a little bit better. So we get a little bit softer of a fall off. It isn't as prevalent in this because I was doing testing on geometry that wasn't the actual ground plane for a few weeks before we actually got the ground plane geometry in here. So it probably did more of a difference there. But basically I'm just mixing between this. Let's see. Here, I'm going to smooth it a little bit. So here I'm smoothing the geometry. I'm just mixing between this really smooth version of the geometry and let's see, the original geometry through the hit attribute that we generated up here. So I'm using essentially this as a mask to blend between like the rest of the ground that hasn't been smoothed and then the area of the ground that I did kind of smooth out a little bit. Anyways, we're gonna bring that back down to
How
what
does
was.
it blend between them? Like, don't they have completely different vertex count?
Actually, no, they don't. And that's
Oh, they don't?
the wonderful thing. That was something I think that's why I ended up using that one triangulation node earlier on. Is because I don't know, it was being really funny about that. But that's the thing. So when I'm deforming the ground, all I'm doing is pushing the verts that are already there down
Uh-huh.
lower. So it still has the same vert count and nothing's changing. Which is really cool. When you work like that and kind of make sure that vert counts get maintained throughout it, you can do so much with it. And so in this case, yeah, I was able to just blend between the two positions. So I'm using this node called mix to blend between the position of the deformed geometry, and then here it's reading the position from the second input, I believe. Yeah, second input, which is the original ground geometry. And because they have the same vert numbers, it mixes perfectly. But the thing that I'm using to mix them with is that hit attribute that we generated earlier. So that's why I went through the trouble of doing that. Sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, totally.
Sweet, awesome.
Good. Yeah.
And then one more layer of just kind of added detail that I wanted to do on there is because yeah, I had to recalculate normals there. Just because it looked a little smooth, was I did a little displace, like a little bit of extra displacement on the areas that I went through, so that way it wasn't so like milky smooth.
Smooth. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just a
So
little bit of
you're
extra detail in there.
basically, you are truly blending between two models. So all the areas that have been contacted are essentially blend shaping, for
Yeah,
better or worse, to a completely different model that is completely baby smooth. And that's why you're adding a secondary noise on top of it, so that those areas don't just look like a smooth plane that's been.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
And again, that's one of the reasons that I love this sort of approach the most, is because, like, it gives you that sort of control. If we were to go with the flip, or the kind of viscousy muddy liquid sort of way, chances are the topology and the vert count would have been changing every single frame, and so something like this would have been a lot more difficult. Definitely possible, but probably more trouble than it's worth.
And it probably would have been a very huge file.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And that would have been a pain in the butt to deal with as well.
Someone is asking, Conlon, is there any reason you went about using the SDF sampling approach over just using array in a SOP solver?
Uh, yeah, I actually think that I did do something with the race op in a later version, but I didn't necessarily weigh those as two different options. I think that this was kind of just the way that I thought the first this was like the first way, but I think the primary advantage for using the SDF sampling is, like I said, you get like not only do you get the information about like what's inside versus what's outside of the anteater as it's, you know, intersecting with this ground, but you also get like a value to go like a magnitude to it as well, like something that intersects like really deep inside, like his shoulder, like the anteater shoulder, like that goes like really deep into the ground here, whereas something like these toes up here, or like I guess these toes down here would probably be a better, you know, example. Like so the value that it's sampling at the shoulder is probably going to be like, this is just a random number, but like it's negative 0.05 or something like that. Whereas something like this would probably be like 0.01. So the area in the shoulder is going to displace more than the area in the like the toe. So that's just kind of why I chose the SDF approach. It'd just be an easy way to kind of get those values. I hope I answered your question. It's good to see you, Conlon.
Yeah, and if
Sweet.
anybody has any other questions, definitely bring them.
Yeah, definitely. Please. I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, so makes sense. Thanks, Dakota.
Sweet. So that was pretty much the beef, the main part of the ground deformation. But there was one more aspect of it, and this one took a little bit longer to kind of get. So I'm gonna go out here to one of my little test scenes. Oh, gotta make sure that the frame range is right, so we're not cooking what we don't need to. And let me hide all this other geometry. Okay. So the next part, like I mentioned, when we were taking a look at the flip example, was one of the really nice things about it was that there was kind of like a leading edge to where the ground was getting deformed. It kind of made like a little mound near the back of the anteater, and that's something. Sorry, I'm gonna hop back to this one over here. That's something that we didn't really have at this point with. Sorry, let me let it load for a sec. That we didn't have with what we have now. Let me show what I'm talking about. Okay, great. So we had the anteater, you know, interacting with the ground, but there wasn't like a little mound here that it was just like a nice little detail that we wanted to have.
A
I'm
little
not sure.
lip, yeah.
Yeah,
The impact.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know how much of it actually showed, but still, it was like a nice little detail to put in there. So that's kind of what I was going for next was creating something that would do it. So I started by kind of testing on like um this very controlled situation. It's just a single like deformed sphere. So it's not the topology isn't animated or anything like that, and it's just going through the dirt. And so we kind of got a little something like that. And we'll break it down a little bit further in the actual example, but just to show, I started with a very basic setup because the one of the things about working with the anteater, it worked just fine for the deforming ground geometry, but in this case we had to like I had to work a lot with like very specific vectors to get like the direction that it was traveling and stuff like that. And there were just so many moving parts. It was hard to test on it because you didn't if something wasn't working, you didn't know there were a lot more variables that you would have to troubleshoot. So I just started here with a very basic setup where, you know, I threw a rock through some ground, and you know, obviously it's not perfect here, but you know, it shows what I want to show. It creates the leading edge over here without creating too much of it over here, and also it's pushing down areas where the actual like rock itself goes through. And so those were all the main goals with what we were trying to do with the anteater version of it. So I'm going to go back to that. So yeah, all that stuff is over here. So over here, working with my favorite node, the solver. Stop. Um, and so I have a lot more inputs for this. So the first one is, I believe this just wires straight to the ground. Yep, that's just the ground geometry. Um, the next input, I think this is the anteater. Let me move it for. Oh, okay, yeah. So for this, I used. I guess I. Oh, poor guy. I cut up the anteater a little bit, and Yeah, I think I did a little bit of extra work to, like I said, there were a lot of moving parts, and just to simplify it and kind of get what we wanted, I only worked on the torso here,
Sure.
um, just because like all the little arms and stuff, they made it kind of difficult, and they weren't really something that were going to impact it as much. They weren't where we were, so I cut off the arms. Poor guy. Oh, it's cooking. What's it cooking? Okay. Great. So yeah, this kind of went two ways. The first one is just the torso as itself, and then here in this sort of second stream is a single point representing the centroid of the torso, and this is really important. I calculated the velocity on it, so that way I got like a vector that showed the direction that the anteater itself was going, which, like I said, will be very important later. And then, as always, my favorite is the volume of the anteater, just because we love being able to sample the volume and all that. So let's go in. Yeah, or maybe let me show you some of the outputs, some of the like the important takeaways from what's going on here. Let it cook for just a sec. Yeah, so it has, okay, I think I'm still visualizing the hit attribute. We don't really want that right now. The two main ones that are coming out of the solver are trail. And that was kind of what hit was in the last one. This is basically just showing where the anteater had been before previously. So if it like interacts, if its arm swings over and touches something, it'll be added to the hit group. And then the other one, which we ended up using, is the leading edge attribute, and it's a little rough here, but you can see that it is sort of like this ramped attribute that is going in the direction of the anteater. Yeah, so it's moving there. We'll let it
Uh,
cook a few more frames.
so that's perfect for the wave.
Yeah, exactly. And gosh, this was quite the problem to solve, and even I did a little bit of like prep work to remember what I did for it, but this one was definitely a heck of a lot more confusing than actually the initial ground deformation. A lot more attributes and a lot more moving pieces. So I'll just do the highlights of it, because yeah, this one goes deep. But as usual, this is the first wrangle that you always put down to transfer the attributes from the last frame onto the original geometry, and then yeah, okay. So this one is the one that calculates that trail attribute. A sample. It's the same thing as last time. It's just doing a volume sample of our anteater VDB and storing it. If it returns a value lower than, I guess, zero point 0.4, that's what I set it to, then it'll create the trail attribute. And I always like to, especially in like stop solvers, multiply things by 0, because anything times 0 is always 0. So if you want like to have an attribute that changes over time, but like you want it to get there and stay there, this is just like a really simple way of making that happen. Because so by default, all the attribute trail on the geometry is all 1, but then by multiplying it by 0, because I have to transfer it back to the original geometry in the, at the end of this, or at the start of the next frame, if you multiply it by 0, it's always going to be 0, so it stays there. So that's my little trick with that. Yeah, so as you can see, I have a bunch of these, like, just like blocks of code that if I recall correctly, this one's basically just describing like how far away from the anteater body it's allowed to create this little mound.
And
That's what
is
all
that
this
is
is.
that code? That's all your code.
Yeah. I wrote this whole thing from scratch. Like I said, one of my favorite things about working in the solver, it's daunting, but it's also like super cool, because literally you're given a blank slate. You're giving nothing but the information from the last frame. That's the only thing Houdini's giving to you. So all this stuff was just like okay, I need to somehow get this sort of information. How do I get it? And then I write a little thing, and it's like, okay, great. Now I need to use this, that place. Oh, but I need this other like attribute to drive this, and you just kind of build it from there. It's always like I know what I need in the end. And then all these little things are just little building blocks to get there. So yeah, I think what I'm doing here, without going too deep into it, is I'm sampling all the positions around it, and I'm letting them know like, hey, you're either within the valid distance or not, if I recall correctly. And I do a little bit of ramping here to smoothly blend the attribute and stuff like that. Yeah, but this one was the big one, and it's got all four of its inputs used, so this one's important. Basically, this is the two big takeaways of this is I have two attributes, deer and dot. So deer is it measures the direction of the, oh geez, okay, how do I not sound like a Martian saying this? So basically
You sound like a Martian. It's okay.
I appreciate it. Um, Basically, I'm calculating a vector between the um, the position of the points on the anteater, or maybe it's 1 point, and then no, it's probably several points on the anteater, and then points like an average position of some of the points on the ground. So I'm creating a vector that points from one to the other, and then I'm using that in dot. That's the attribute that I have here, which is essentially a dot product between the velocity of the overall average velocity of the anteater and the vector that I created before. So the dot product is something that we use very often, and it essentially it's a math function that describes, I guess for lack of a better words, how similar two vectors are. So if this is one vector and this is another vector, and I do the dot product of them and they're both pointing in the same direction, the result of the dot product is 1. If I do it like this, where they're perpendicular to each other, so they're not facing the same way at all, they're literally pointing in opposite directions perfectly, then the result of the dot product is 0. And I can't bend my arm the other way, but you get the picture. If one's pointing up and one's pointing down, the result of the dot product is going to be -1. So basically, it's a really cool way of showing, or of measuring how similar two vectors are. So in this case, I was using this because I have a vector that points towards each like surrounding point from the anteater to each surrounding point on the ground, and then I have the velocity. So I'm using this to kind of isolate the ones that are only pointing in front of the anteater's like what is it, like path of movement. Um, yeah, sorry, that was a lot. If anybody has any questions, please
It's
stop
a
me.
lot, but remember, like the people that are watching that are interested in Houdini, that's not going to seem like that far off.
For
Yeah.
sure, yeah,
So
for
yeah,
sure. Awesome.
yeah.
So that was like the secret sauce right there to getting this little dirt mound, was just figuring out which points were in the path of motion from uh the path of motion of the anteater. Great. Okay. If you notice, leaving the solver, we don't actually get any deformed geometry. Like here, let me turn off visualizers. Like the geometry is the same on frame 62 that it was frame 61, same on 63, stuff like that. But what we do get is, like I said, this leading edge attribute, which is kind of what we did all this for. Let me turn that on. And yeah, so we have that, and we're going to use that later down the line. So I just do a little bit of post processing on it to like clamp the values, so I make sure that they don't go too far over 1 or too low below 0. I blurred a little bit to make it a little bit nicer, a little bit smoother, because before it was all that, it was kind of chunky.
Yeah.
And then this one is the one that I actually use to deform it. So let me turn off visualizers for this so we can see it. So this one is officially deforming it. And basically what this is doing is it's checking to see if the points have a leading edge attribute value higher than whatever threshold I set. And then it's moving these points up in y, based on this little variable that I created, which is the value of the leading edge attribute times a multiplier. So I can multiply this up, I can multiply this down, and kind of control it like that. And again, just to reemphasize everything that I'm about, this was I love this because you can control it after the fact. So you tell me to make the dirt mound higher, I make it higher. You tell me to make it fall off more, I just blur it a little bit more, and it'll smooth fall off.
Great.
So yeah, that's again, nothing but love for Houdini here. It's just a completely different way of working, and I'd love it. So yeah, so we have a little dirt mound, and I think I do a little bit of the similar things that I do in the other one, where like, oh yeah, that's not going to show up very well. Where I do a little bit of dirt displacement. So okay, so another thing is when you do sort of like these geometry displacements, oftentimes what you'll find is, and this is just a little tip for my Houdini users out there, you'll find that geometry intersects with each other when you do these sort of displacements. So a quick little trick before that is to blur the normals. So this is the same geometry, just the normals are, you know, completely blurred, so it looks a lot smoother. If you blur the normals before you displace, you have a less chance of intersecting geometry. Just a fun little trick. Um, yeah. So, and then let's see, which one does this do? Yeah. Okay. I think I'm blend. Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. So here I'm kind of displacing a lot of it, and then this is blending it back with the original geometry. So we get some of that initial. Oh, let me do the normals so we can see it better. We get some of the original details in there as well. So this is so great. So we got our leading edge. That was a whole thing. But now we don't have the where the ground is deforming. So that's where we just kind of do that same thing that we did before when we were smoothing out and displacing the original ground mesh, where we blend these two based on an attribute, and I'm blending it based on that hit attribute that we calculated earlier. So if we view that, it's going to take a second to cook because it's running through like 4 different solvers. And then let me hit normal, and there we go. Now we have our ground indent blended with our kind of leading edge. And if we ghost our Anteater, yep, there it is, little leading edge on there.
Yeah, that works great.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was the biggest effect. I think that was the one that I like spent the most time on developing and all that. And then everything else. So I'm just trying to say that was the hard part. Everything else just kind of fell into place after that. So with the ground geometry, we were now able to do our grain sim, and so we would have something to interact with and stuff like that. Um, do we have time for me to go through the
Yeah,
grain sim?
totally. And
Okay, sweet.
let's talk about the grain sim thing for a second. So,
Yep.
early on, I started doing some tests in Maya, not for this shot, but for some other shots. Like it was more like the spear hitting the ground and having like little rocks explode. So I
Mhm.
wasn't a Houdini guy, and I just thought, you know what, I could do this in Maya, and I could just Alembic out 10,000 little pebbles. It'll be fine, and it exported fine, and everything was great. And I figured since Unreal could handle pretty much unlimited amount of geometry, I'm like, what the hell are like 5,000 little rocks? It's not going to be anything for it, or even 500 little rocks. I thought if it could handle 20 million polygon ground, it'll handle 50,000 polygons worth of rocks, no issue. And it quickly found out that it's not so much the poly count, but it's the call count, the amount of individual objects that really kills Unreal. And that's when I was like, oh crap, I can't do that method. Even if I could get it out of Maya, even though the file size was very small, it still didn't like that. It wanted the grains or the rocks or whatever to be instanced. And this is going to connect to what you're talking about right now, where we had to figure out not just how to get this to look good, which is what Dakota is about to show, but how do we get that back into Unreal and replace all the particles for very heavy pieces of geometry, megascan rocks, and making millions of them. And it didn't care at all how many polygons worth of little rocks it created, as long as it was created in Unreal. Because as long as it was instanced in Unreal, it could do a zillion polygons. But if it was external, it was a problem. So anyway, hope that makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, sweet. So when this part actually, like, it looks like a lot of setup, and it kind of is, but once we actually went to, because like I said, I'm not a huge fan of simming. Hi Ben. Um I'm not a huge fan of simming, but also just kind of doing a little bit of grunt work on the back end made it to where when I hit simulate, and this is not always the case. It's very rarely the case, but everything just kind of worked, and that was very nice.
It is nice when
So
something works.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's so rare that that ever happens. But yeah, sweet. So the first thing that I did was I again I always start with my solver. I love my solver. Favorite solver in Houdini is the regular solver. And I think from this one I am generating another hit attribute. Let me visualize that. Oh, I have visualizers off, and then let me view that. Yeah, so again, I'm doing a very similar thing that I was before. I probably could have reused it up here, but I wanted the flexibility of, if I needed to change what this hit attribute looks like as opposed to the hit attribute we use for the leading edge and deforming solvers. I just wanted to see what specific areas the Anteater would be intersecting with, and I think this one has like a little bit lower of a threshold. Yeah, so we're getting a tighter area where it calculates that hit data. So yeah, so we got that, and again, this is literally just copy paste from the last one. Nothing special is being done here. I'm just changing the parameters to make it a little bit tighter on here, a little bit more suited to our needs. And then I'm doing a little bit of post-process work on it afterwards too, and it's going to take just a sec. I think here I'm just getting the sort of the edges of it, and the reason being is it's probably not going to be super prevalent on this frame, but in some of the some of the later frames where like the whole anteater's body is on the ground. Okay, wait, sorry, let me back up and just talk about like what I'm trying to achieve here. I'm trying to create an emission attribute for the grain that we're going to be creating, so where the grain is going to be coming from, because like I showed earlier, one thing that is totally, I mean, I wouldn't call it totally viable. One thing that you can do is just have a pit of grains and run your little guy through them, and he'll splash grains everywhere. But that was really slow. So I figured it would just be best if we emit grains, like we target emit grains where they need to be. So that being said, I'm taking the time to calculate that hit attribute again, and just getting the edges of it, so that way we don't get over emission, and b, we don't get a emission that happens like right in the areas where the anteater's like laying, like when his body is on the ground, it's covering the ground completely, and we're not going to see that, so there's really no point in putting the having it emit from there. So I'm just going through a little bit of setting up a little thing to just get the edges over here.
So like the red stuff is basically going to emit particles.
Yep, exactly.
As it's created.
Yeah. So this is completely procedural and interactive. So if you were to give me a different animation of the anteater, it would calculate this edge all the same, which is great. But yeah, so this whole area is where it's going to emit, and I believe my Houdini has frozen. I apologize. Give it one sec. This is actually, I'm really surprised that it took this long to do this, because seeing that white screen, that's more of like your day-to-day in Houdini. That's your experience on a day-to-day basis. You spend a lot of time looking at that the white loading screen. Yeah,
That's okay. That's part of the process.
it's all part of the process.
Yeah.
All right, great. Okay, so from there, I'm just kind of let's take a look at this. Oh yeah, because it hasn't simulated anything yet. The only reason I'm getting an error here is because I have the simulation starting on frame 1061, and because I'm was before it doesn't have any data to read from, so that's why it's kind of freaking out a little bit. Um, but yeah, basically, what I'm kind of doing here is I'm just setting different parameters for the emission attribute, because yeah, I want it to emit all along the edges of where it's connecting with, but I don't want it to emit super uniformly, and I only really want it to emit under certain conditions. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm sampling the velocity from, so again, just to reiterate, the main stream input is our deforming ground. So that's why if we take a look at this, that's the only thing that shows up. And basically all we're doing is we're just sampling the velocity of our little anteater, and we're calculating the speed based on from the velocity. So we know we only want the magnitude of the way that it's moving. We don't necessarily need the direction in this case. And then basically just creating a range that describes like, okay, if the sampled speed is like within this range minimum and this range maximum, you can go ahead and emit from there. That's basically what we're doing here, and we're storing that in an attribute called contact. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So this next thing is oh, and I'm blurring it a little bit. So let's take a look at what the contact attribute looks like. Yeah. So we have a little bit here where the anteater's toe touches. Let me move it to a frame where the body touches, and maybe we'll be able to see it a little bit better. Yeah, it's gonna cook for just a second. I'm so glad we get to do this because half of what I do on a daily basis is wait for things to happen. So
Yeah.
that yeah, this is like a real peer into it.
This is
Um,
an unfiltered look at it. All the cool stuff and the very boring stuff. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, great. So we have this contact attribute right here, which is kind of blurred and all that. So it's only emitting from specific places. Right now, the velocity is pretty high, so it all kind of is within that threshold. So that's why most of what we saw earlier as being our hit edges. That's why it looks very similar. But yeah, okay. So this part was really cool though. I like this. So I'm gonna bring it down here, and it's gonna load for just a second. And now all of our ground is red, and this is actually the texture that you guys gave me for that is actually used in Unreal Engine. And for all intents and purposes, so it's a point color, but for all intents and purposes, it works the same as like a vertex color. So I'm just loading this in, and basically what that's going to do is it's going to ensure that wherever these grains emit from, they're going to get the same color from like the texture on the ground, basically. And I don't think that this was used too much in Unreal, but I just put this in here just because that's what I'm used to when working with other stuff. I'm sure that there are ways to access it in Unreal, but that's a little bit out of my area.
Yeah, we definitely didn't apply that into
Yeah.
our thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, maybe some other time. It's just good to know that that sort of thing exists. And I'm sure somebody with that cool plugin that we used for Niagara, I'm sure they thought of that as well. So yeah. But anyways, yeah. So I'm just establishing the color, and next up I am scattering. So scattering is something you do very frequently in Houdini. It's very powerful with what it can do with it. Um, but yeah, I'm just creating all these points in the areas. I'm scattering based on this contact attribute right here, which is what we created earlier. So it's essentially initializing all these source points that'll eventually be fed into our grain simulation, and those will essentially be our grains. And so it will continue to add these as time goes on. So if we go back to frame 1061, it should only be by the little foot area, and then yeah, as it moves forward, it'll be by the shoulders and all that based on that contact attribute that we created earlier. Yeah, that happens. Sorry about that.
Don't be sorry. We've literally had episodes where
It just crashes.
it crashed,
Oh
everything
no,
was wrong. Yeah, it happens. That's part of the process.
Yeah, one time
absolutely.
Miguel disappeared because his whole computer crashed.
Yeah,
Oh
literally,
no.
my computer took such a dump that I was like, Trent, you just do the rest of the
No, but I
stream.
couldn't because everything's connected to your computer, so there was no sound.
No. Oh my gosh. Um, but sweet, yeah. So next up, I just thinned it out a little bit, and we'll kind of skip past this because most of this is just like the boring setup stuff. I showed you all the major parts. In addition to this, though, I have a couple merges over here. This is just more like art direction thing where I took like little pieces of the anteater. So let's go over here at the origin, and I painted a mask on it. Let me. I just started like taking little bits and pieces of the anteater that like collided with the ground at certain. So this is so like a lot of times what we all love doing is we love setting up a simulation, and ideally it all works great, but then we can do a few more things to art direct it. And so I felt that it would be really cool to have more areas, or like whenever like the anteater does like a big kick with his foot, more grain spawn. So I'm just kind of creating these little areas. yeah, creating these little areas where I want extra particles to spawn from the foot of the anteater and stuff like that. So let's see where we're scattering. Yeah, so we're just kind of putting them on the foot over here. Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, and then other than that, I'm not going to probably be able to run the sim on my home computer, but essentially what this is a grain sim using Vellum. Vellum is an incredibly versatile solver in Houdini. It can do all kinds of stuff. It does grains, it does fluids, or sorry, liquids. It does soft body simulations, rigid body simulations, and cloth, hair, all that stuff. This thing is awesome. And they just keep developing it. So it's super cool. But in this case, I just did a grain sim. So I'm giving it input points, giving it collision geometry, which is our ground. Ooh, I hope that doesn't freeze it. Anyways, so I give it the collision geometry, which is the ground that we did earlier. And like I said, this one was just kind of really cool in that it worked on basically the first try. Obviously, I had to tweak the settings a little bit to get it to look the way that we wanted. But yeah, it was this one was probably the simplest part of the project, was just plugging it in and letting it run. And yeah, we ended up getting this. Yeah, so it just emits from all the places with high velocity and also where it's contacting with. And yeah, they're kind of moving around like grains. We got a couple of places that flick off grains right there. It's very subtle, and I don't know how well it shows on the stream, but where he does that big old kick right there, we got extra grains emitting from there. And that was pretty much it for this effect. Other than getting it into Unreal, which you guys will talk about here in a little minute. But just on my end, I use this really cool Houdini Labs plugin. So Houdini Labs is it's like I think they used to call it like game tools or something like that, because they really have a bunch of tools oriented to getting Houdini things into game engines, which is really cool. But now it's broadened, so they have all these kinds of like experimental tools that may or may not be production ready, but they're always super helpful. And this one is the Houdini
Is
tonight.
that all created by Houdini guys?
Yeah. So Side Effects releases it and they update it, and they
Okay.
just keep releasing tools for it. So it's I'm gonna say built into Houdini. You have to install it manually sometimes, but it is from Side Effects. So yeah, it's some of their tools. Oh yeah, so okay, so this is kind of like a little nerdy workflow thing that I really enjoy doing. So, um, like you guys mentioned, with the Alembic cache, Unreal kind of like it can get a little weird if like file sizes are too big or some sort of like caches are too big. So one thing to make sure that this didn't crash when we did it was I used the Houdini to Niagara thing, which exports this like JSON file that can be loaded in Niagara that you guys are going to go over. But basically, I cut this up into partitions, basically. So I don't know if I have the actual grain sim saved to disk. It'd be really cool if I did. Ah, I do. Sweet. Okay. So I have the grain sim. I'm just deleting it, right? Deleting certain points. And then here I am creating this like this little wrangle that essentially it culls some of the points. So here before we have not a lot of points. We have 134,000. It can handle a lot more. And then here I do like a cull by ID number. So each particle has an ID number, and I just basically say if it I use the modulo function, which basically it gives you the remainder of a division operate. We don't have to go too much into that. It's its own thing, but basically I'm saying like cull every like or keep only one every 10 points. So that's what that's doing. So that's why we have such a small point number here compared to here, literally 10 times less. And then to efficiently get all these different partitions out, so I gave Miguel and Tran the option to load in as many partitions as Unreal could handle. Um, it's definitely possible to like just sit there and say, okay, I want partition number one, export. Okay, partition number two, export. But that can get a little boring. And I like to automate my things. So this one's I used what's called tops, which is task operators, which are it essentially I love them to death. They're so cool because they let you set something up and just like walk away for like a day or something like that and come back and it'll do everything you want it to do. So in this case, I just set up a very basic loop that essentially it essentially manually changed which partition number I was exporting out. So all I had to do was hit run and it would start. I'm not going to actually do it, but it just you start it like this, it runs, and then when by the time it's done, you come back, it has all 10 partitions written out for you. So that's just a little workflow thing. Won't go too far into that because that's not super duper exciting, but I'm kind of a nerd about that. Great. So that's all with the ground effects. So the grain and the ground. Do we have time to go into the blood effects, or do you guys
Yeah,
want to
go
take
for
over?
it. Go for it.
Awesome. So the blood, the blood, the blood. It was a whole experience, and I took a bunch of different approaches on it. But ultimately, in the end, my good old trusty solver sop came in handy, and that was what I ended up using for it. So let me get a video of the blood. I think it's called slow blood test.
So we went pretty Kill Bill on this for a minute, right? We went
Yeah.
really violent, and there was blood gushing everywhere. And I kind of wanted that originally, but I kind of backed off. I was like, "Ooh, that looks pretty brutal." Dakota
Man.
showed it to me in class, and I was like, "Oh my god, it looked incredible." If you have the test,
Yeah. Let me pull it up. Yeah, I was a pretty. Oh, not this one, not this one. The blood went through so many different iterations that yeah, there we go. No, that one's kind of that one's old. Where is it? Oh, Pop's blood. Yeah, right here, right here. This is the one.
Oh, that's really bloody.
Yeah, it could have definitely been toned down, but this was sort of like my proof of concept for it. It was yeah.
no, and I think it looks amazing. I didn't have the balls to do this one. I was like, oh my God. It also caused all kinds of issues because all the other shots we already have
Hmm.
don't have this much blood. And then the next scene, we have a ceremony sequence where like the anteater's being eaten, and it just looked so gross that. And I also thought you would just kind of hate the characters if they were this, if they made this thing suffer that much. So,
Right.
but it looks incredible. So.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, this was a heck of a journey to even get to this point, but I definitely like the one that we ended up going with. Yeah, because this one here, I have an old version of this. I cleaned this up a little bit for the stream, but I have another one over here, blood effects messy, and so this one just kind of it's all over the place, and this one definitely went through the most iterations, definitely of anything that I worked on here. Um, yeah, but on the bright side, now that I have that experience making that disgusting spurting blood, I can
Know how
use
to
that
do it. Yeah.
elsewhere. Yeah. And just for all my Houdini guys in the audience that might be curious, it wasn't a liquid sim. It ended up just being a particle simulation. Um, so oh no, what's going on? I'm so sorry.
So what does that mean? So basically, it's just particles shooting out, and then they're just basically meshed.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if we really go down to it, that's exactly what a liquid sim is as well. But I was having so many issues with the liquid simulation. Like collisions weren't working. I it was like cleaning out an attic and dusting every single corner like clean. I was trying everything on it and I just couldn't get it to work. So at the end of the day, some really simple, easy to control particles ended up being the way to go. I did a little special work on them inside. Okay, so this is the funniest thing. So I keep talking about how much I love the solver SOP. Okay, SOP is surface operator. That's everything you see here in Houdini. Like all these nodes, these are called SOPs. But then dynamic simulations, they kind of they exist in a different world called DOPs. So if I drop a DOP network, they're yeah, we're with the fluid PBD. By PBD, do you mean the particle version that I did, or sorry, Conlon, just saw your thing. We'll go to that in just a sec. But anyway, so dynamic simulations exist in the world of DOPS, which is dynamic operators, and but even when I did use the DOPS version of it, I still used that solver within that simulation. So I'm just a huge fan of using that. But yeah, basically all I did for the particle version of it was as the particles were emitting, I had a solver inside, an extra solver inside of it that was basically saying, okay, search for each particle, search for the particles around you and sort of like average your position. And that got some of the stringier looks of the blood. So it looked a little bit more fluid like than just the regular particles coming out there, which would it would be more of like an unfocused spray. So yeah. Sorry, I think I just went on a tangent there. I hope I answered some sort of question in there. Um, and then, Conlon, let me see your question again. Sorry.
Yeah,
Where do I bring up the chat? Oh, awesome. Thanks. Did you use pop fluid for some? Oh, got it. No, sorry. I understand. No, I did not. And I am. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. It took me 2 seconds to get what you're saying. I totally got it. And no, I did not. I have had zero luck with that node. So what he's talking about is, okay, if we create a pop network, which is a particle network, essentially, uh, one of the node one of the nodes that you can use is pop fluid, and essentially what this is, it's really cool when it works, but that's the caveat: when it works. Essentially it imitates some of the properties of flip, to get sort of like a nice fluidy look. You can get some really nice small scale effects with this, as well as like get some cool sheeting water effects. Very cool. I have never like I've tried to use this node a million times. I've never been able to get it to work. It's incredibly volatile, and if you don't bump up these constraint iterations to ungodly amounts, in my experience, again, I'm no expert with it, so it will explode. And when you bump up the constraint iterations, it slows down immensely. And also, like I said, when working with this shot, I had a lot of issues with with the collisions of it. Okay, so actually there are a bunch of problems with this shot. So first of all, the Anteater, he moves a lot throughout the course of the shot, and typically moving simulations are very difficult to deal with, because you see a lot of stepping in between. So like, because like on frame one it'll be here, and then on frame two it'll be here, and so the distance between here, it like, I mean, obviously there are things to do to close that gap, but otherwise it'll look like particles or fluid or whatever was emitted from two different locations, which they are, and it won't necessarily interpolate between them. So seeing that stepping is one of the big problems of working with fast moving animations, and that's what this was. So that was the first issue. So I already needed a lot of. So one of the ways that you combat that is by using more substeps. Now that's not the most efficient way, but it's one of the ways of handling that. In this case, that ended up being the best way to handle it. So that already slows down your simulation. Next is the constraint iterations, having to get like bump those up to get them to work. With pop fluids, that slows it down even more. And then, like I said, I was having issues with collisions, as it was, and so ultimately I decided not even to try it, because I hadn't been able to get it to work before, and I knew that if I did try and go down that avenue, it would slow me down so much. I would spend so much time just trying to get baseline working that I wouldn't have enough time to really art direct it. So I hope I answered your question there. But yeah, so let's see if this one shows it. But no, that one's so fast. So yeah, a lot of these are really short tests because it was just taking so long to sim. Yeah, okay. So we have, I don't
That's
know if
pretty
it's,
funny.
yeah, this one's pretty bloody too. But unfortunately, it once it hits the ground, it doesn't really look like blood. Like it looks like taffy or whatever. And um, it's kind of visible here. It might be more visible in. Oh, this one's probably going to be shorter than the other one, but we'll see if it helps. But there's like it's very subtle here, but as if I were to let the simulation run longer, it would be a lot more apparent. Oh, I can't scrub in VLC. That sucks. Um, I'm just gonna let it go. But there was like this weird artifacting and popping happening around the foot, and that would, so even if I did get them to stick on the ground and have like really cool blood shapes, which I didn't end up getting because this was just so hard to iterate on, if they were in contact, I couldn't figure out why. I tried literally everything, but um, if the particle fluid was in contact with these feet for too long, they would just like pop, like they would like spread out in the instant of a frame, and it looked wrong. And we would get some weird like banding artifacts going on. You can kind of see it here at the end, like that weird like whatever that is. It's like literally parting the Red Sea. Um, yeah. So ultimately, I didn't go with that. Sorry, I know we're kind of running out of time. I'm gonna get to the
You
actual.
have all the time. Take your time.
All
Yeah.
right, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what we ended up doing is, again, just another SOP solver, quote unquote simulation. So okay, this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I spent all this time developing the system, and in the end, I realized I was just reinventing the wheel. So to really get this, let me grab something
That
really fast.
happens. That happens to us all the time. Just so you know, like
Really,
I'll give you an example. Like the past few weeks, one of the things that we've been doing is there's a few sequences where I've thought all along, like, you know what, we really need to add this complicated thing here, and we need to add this complicated thing out. And there was probably like 3 sequences that I wanted to go back in because I felt like in the edit it needed certain stuff, and I went back in, we redid motion capture, put it
hmm
in there, and it was like, that doesn't work. The original one looks better. And I just wasted so much time, but you kind of have to go there to realize that you didn't need it. Do you know
for
what I
sure.
mean? So it's totally fine. And it's not like you lost that time because you're
Yeah,
gaining the wisdom. The next time you approach that problem, you're gonna be like, nah, that's fine.
yeah,
So, or let's do it the easy way. But it's always the simplest way is the best way.
Yeah,
100%.
nothing
Yeah.
ever works perfect. There's always
Yeah,
sometimes one step forward, 2 steps back.
But
yeah,
just
That's all
the fact that
CG.
that CG artists always tend to overcomplicate shit, and the easiest way of approaching the problem is usually the better looking and just the fastest way.
yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so yeah, so approaching this, the first thing that I kind of did, because like I said, I love, hang on, sorry, let me, no, sorry, there we go. I love being able to control all these things, and I hate relying on simulations and stuff like that. So in order to like really art direct this blood, the first thing I did, when creating this effect was I took the I call these the anteater's jammies, his little pajamas. I took these into Substance, and I kind of painted this little map on it. And this is really low res in this case. But if I were to, no, I'm not going to do that on my computer. I'm going to blow it up. So it's really low res here, but I promise it's a lot higher res than it actually is. The idea behind it was I was gonna start with this, and I was gonna do a sort of like a growth sim on it to simulate the blood spreading out from where it got punctured by the spear. Um, so right here actually illustrates like the first problem that I faced with it, is that this is incredibly low res, and we want higher res blood. So one of the things I could have done to do it, is to like freeze the anteater and just like subdivide them like a million times, but that would slow me down like a lot, and I didn't want to do that. Like I said, iteration time is key here. So what I ended up doing, and again, this is where I kind of reinvented the wheel, but I have this grid down here, and it's going to take a little second to load because it is a rather large, high resolution grid. I'm going to do that. Um, yeah. So if I recall, this is, yeah, we can't even see the polygons on here because it's so high res. But basically,
Oh, there's actually there's
yeah,
actually
exactly. It's so hard to see. Yeah, there
yeah,
we go. But essentially, this is the equivalent of like a 4K image right here. So it's 4,000 like 4,097 primitives by 4,097 primitives. So it's very dense, very high res. And basically what I did was, I'm going to get rid of that because we don't need that anymore. Projected some UVs on it as I do, and it's going to take a little second to get this going. Yep, UVs, and then I put the blood map on it, so we can see it in a little bit higher resolution. I'm going to turn off the UVs again. Yeah, so that's what it looks like coming out of the thing. So yeah, there's a lot more detail there than what showed on the anteater itself. And let's
And
see,
did
I
you
didn't.
just hand draw that in Substance?
Yes, I did. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. um, that was a trip. I hadn't opened Substance in so long, but I figured that this would be like the I really hesitate to like jump between programs like that, especially in Houdini, just because like having like a very procedural workflow is very important to me. So like, if I change one thing, everything goes. But in this case, it made the most sense to do that.
Like direction, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, I could have tried to paint a map in Houdini, but I would have had to subdivide the Anteater like a million times, and it wouldn't have been very efficient.
Is that because it's using like a form of, because it's vertex painting, right?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very very similar. But at the same time, I wouldn't have gotten the same resolution that I got with this.
Okay.
So let's see, what am I doing here? I'm taking the color. Oh yeah, yeah, okay. I'm just basically what I'm doing here is I'm turning this into a black and white mask. It's not super important. Promoting that to primitive values. So basically, okay. So there are different types of attributes in Houdini. There are point attributes, which are the most commonly used. That's everything from like color for like they're very similar to like the vertex attributes in Maya and stuff like that. But we have like point normals, we have point color, we have position, we have velocity. Those are a lot of the most commonly used point attributes. Then we have vertex attributes, which more often than not are either only normals or UVs. And then we have primitive attributes, and we have detail attributes, which essentially encapsulates the whole geometry. But anyway, so for this, I'm promoting the color from a point attribute to a primitive attribute. So now it is one color value per primitive. That's kind of the point of having the grid be the same like resolution as a 4K image. And then I am scattering onto these points. Or sorry, I'm using the color attribute to scatter just like a ton of points on there. And again, this was the whole point of sort of doing it this way as opposed to on the actual Anteater itself, because I just wanted an insane amount of resolution that would have been very difficult to do if I was working directly off the Anteater. So this looks all like disjointed and stuff like that, and that's just because that's what came out of Painter and all that. So the next step is to put this onto the Anteater Geo. So here, let me goes to other objects. What frame did I freeze this guy on? 1030. Okay. We'll just do that. There we go. Yeah, so there it's now on the side of the Anteater. I did a little bit of manual, like just quick and dirty selection blasting to get rid of some of those stray points over there that were on the UV seams. But yeah, so now I have this really dense point cloud representing my blood splatter on the Anteater, and this is where I say that I completely reinvented the wheel for it unnecessarily, because I learned after going through all the trouble of doing that this node, the scatter node that I use to scatter these points, it has where is it? I saw it on here. Oh yeah, density texture. So I could have just plugged this into the Anteater in the first place, and it would have done this exact same thing without having to do this whole weird thing on a grid and then sampling the UVs to put them back on the grid. So I reinvented the wheel, but like you both said, I learned a lot from it. So
Yeah.
it wasn't for nothing, but still kind of silly. But yeah, anyway, so next up, I'm writing a little bit of code here to get the position of the spear. So let's see. So the first input is our point cloud over here. Our second input here, I'm going to get rid of that, is I believe the spear.
Dakota, let me interrupt for a second. All the coding stuff, did you
Yep.
know coding before you started Gnomon, or
Not
was
really.
it something
No.
you picked up at Gnomon?
Yeah, no, this was 100. Like I can 100% attribute this to Gnomon. I didn't know any Vex beforehand, a lot of it is just because it's very daunting because you're presented with a whole new language, and in the grand scheme of things, we only are at Gnomon for a very short amount of time. 2 if you're in the DP program, and then 3 if you're BFA. 3 to 4, and so it and really I only got exposure to Vex in my I mean, this is kind of an overgeneralization because effect starts a little bit earlier, but for only like a year and a half, maybe at most. That's just sort of like speaking to the caliber of the classes we take, and just the rigorous practice they put you through to just get really comfortable with this over time.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was all Gnomon.
Yeah, and if you're watching this and you're looking at the programming and you're intimidated, I
Yeah.
think Dakota's an exception. Like most people don't even need to know how to do programming. If you're a modeler, you don't need to know any of this stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but it shows you how powerful it is. So when you first came into school, what was
Mhm.
your background?
Not a whole. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, before you started school.
Yeah. So I kind of always had an inkling that I would be in the the creative media industry in one way, shape, or form. And I went to a college beforehand where primarily I did like motion graphics in 2D, so like After Effects stuff. That was kind of the focus of that program. So coming into Gnomon, that was really all that I had. I took like a 5 week Houdini course beforehand, which was a nice introduction, and I think that was like the little taste of it that I got that propelled me to continue pursuing it. But other than that, I didn't really have a strong 3D background or anything like that.
But you had you already kind of knew you wanted to go Houdini route for you to already have taken a 5 week class.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also I don't have any 2D background whatsoever. Like it's something I want to work on and something I want to do a lot better, but it's not something I've ever really done. And so knowing that and just being more of like I really enjoy a lot of the technical aspects of just the whole CG pipeline. So effects kind of made sense for me because it is one of the more technically oriented tracks. So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. Really good to hear, I think. Because I bet, yeah, someone watches like, how do you know all this? You're like, wow, you can learn all of this
Well, the
Yeah,
reason
in a
why,
lot of time.
the reason why, yeah, and I'm sorry to cut you off when I did, but
yeah.
I just don't want anyone to see all the programming because I remember before I went to Gnomon, that a lot of people would say like, oh, if you want to be a CG artist, and at the time I wanted to be a modeler, you have to know how to do scripting, and I was like, oh my god, I'm like, borderline Forrest Gump. I don't want to fucking learn how to do that stuff. And you do not have to know how to do that if you don't want to. So
There's different.
technical people do what Dakota's doing, and they make everything look awesome. And you don't, if that's not your thing, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm. And yeah, I there's a niche for everyone, right? Like
yeah,
you put me in front of ZBrush, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't even know how to navigate the viewport, first off, but like that's definitely not up my alley, but something like this is. So
yeah. But anyway, keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to.
no,
I was actually curious about the programming side. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. No, I really appreciate you asking. Um, but yeah, sweet. So second input, sorry, just to backtrack, we're back over on like the setup, like so ultimately the end goal is to create like a growth solver for this point cloud. So that way it'll start, the blood will start where the spear hits, and then it will like fan out and continue to grow over time, to give it like that slow moving blood look. So the first input being the point clouds, third input being the I believe that's the anteater. Yep, that's the anteater. And then the second input, look at that, we have another solver, my favorite thing in the whole wide world. So this solver is basically doing exactly what the other solvers were doing in the excuse me, the ground deforming example. But essentially what it's doing is it's taking there's a VDB over here. Oh, and it's going to be way out in the distance because the spear starts really far away. So let's go to like frame 61. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So it essentially it takes it's taking a patch of the anteater's little pajamas, and it's creating a hit attribute over time based on where the I think I turned visualizers up, based on where the spear is. So there's the spear, and then here you can see I have a little hit attribute right here. Great. So basically what this is doing is it's sampling the it is sampling the hit position from the anteater over time, and it is kind of, and these are like, we're setting up like our little start points for the growth sim. So again, the reason that they're just kind of little spots is because this point cloud is significantly higher resolution than the oh shoot, I should go to this frame, sorry, than the anteater pajamas. So they're only sampling in a very small radius, hence why we get kind of that let me go back to it, the very small circles. So very small radius around the points, but essentially these are all our starting points. These nodes right here, I use to kind of noise up how they look. And this is just a really quick, I won't spend too much time on it, but just a cool little trick that I love doing all the time to get some noise when everything is just too uniform, is giving the points a rest attribute, displacing those points. Yeah, it's a big displacement. Displacing them really big. And then, oh, I guess I do a little bit of extra stuff here where I kind of expand that attribute, but that's not really important to this part. The important part is just noising it up, giving it an attribute, and then returning it to that rest position. You use the rest position that you created here to return everything to its original position. And in doing so, you get these nice little noised up edges. So that's just something I do very often to noise up and break up some uniformity. Um, Sweet. Yeah. So again, this is the solver that will end up being the blood flow moving. But I just do a couple of different things here to, this is the main one right here, because if I let it go right now, yeah, the noise is nice, but it will still kind of expand very uniformly. So I create another attribute on it. Let me cook it really fast. I'm just creating another attribute that will essentially act as like resistance to the spreading of the blood. So that way it doesn't all move at the same pace. And this is just, like I said, a noised up attribute that the solver takes into account when doing it. So the white and red spots are like areas of higher resistance, where the blue is areas of lower resistance. So as we run the sim, it should spread and kind of create these cool little details. If you notice this area right here, which is about where the spear is going to hit, that's all blue, and that's because I wanted it to like fan out kind of fast at first and then slow down as it was moving on. So that's what that was. Let's go ahead and go to hit. All right, now the actual sim. I don't know how much of this is going to be able to run on my computer, but yeah. So this is essentially, again, this is just to transfer the attributes of the last frame, and then this one right here is a little block of code that I wrote that is essentially saying like, okay, take a look at the point. So for each point, take a look at the points around you, compare the resistance values. If they are still resisting, then add like a little counter to it to like wear down that resistance. That will be updated on the next frame. But if the resistance value is low enough, go ahead and add that, expand this hit attribute. And so essentially it does that to expand the blood effect. And then, yep, so that does it. And then this right here removes all the points that are below a certain hit value threshold. Whew. And so this will grow over time. Yeah, there it is, growing a little bit. And this is relatively fast. We're working with, I guess not a ton. How many points are we actually working with beforehand? We're working with almost 1,000,000 points. So yeah, this is running decently. But yeah, it expands ever so slowly. Also, this stuff right up here, these points are being updated as the spear moves along the geometry as well. So it's creating new starting points, which is kind of cool. And then the last thing we needed to do was attach this point cloud to the moving anteater geometry, and we did that basically by so the something that the point cloud and the anteater have in common are UVs, because we well, no, they do. So when we scatter onto this grid, they have UV coordinate values, and those coordinate values correspond, because we only scattered on the areas that I drew on. they correspond to the UV values on the original geometry. And so by doing that, we were able to attach, let me get the Anteater in there. We were able to attach this point cloud to the moving Anteater geometry. Sorry, I think I just rambled a little bit. So I guess in summary, we're taking the UV value, sampling the world space position from that UV value on the pajama or the Anteater. Sorry, I keep calling them pajamas. Geometry, and
They are
then
pajamas. They are basically.
yeah,
So
they're just so they're yeah, it's just such a cute element to it. You got to call them pajamas. But yeah, so we're sampling the position, the world space position from that UV coordinate, and then assigning that position to the position of the points. And it works pretty well. Yeah, so it tracks with the geometry and continues to spread as the simulation, again, I use that loosely, as it goes on. Yeah, and that was about it. Oh, last little step is we didn't just render these as points. We didn't bring them into Unreal as points. But this is something that you do in all liquid sims. So I decided to do it for this because blood is a liquid, and even though we didn't sim this like a liquid, it is still liquid. We and this might slow down a little bit, but we surface the particles, so they are now a geometry mesh. So they have primitives and vertices now instead of just points. Um, Gave it a little color for viewport stuff, and yeah, and that's pretty much how we made that blood effect.
Cool.
that's
So,
awesome.
do you want to talk about how you exported the particles out for Houdini?
Yeah, definitely. So actually there's not a lot more on my end that you know
Sorry,
I,
for Unreal, like how you exported the particles out, like what was the format that we ended up using? I have
yeah,
it
it's like
right
some weird JSON file or something like that.
here. Yeah, JSON files.
It was, oh no, that's different.
I'll show how to bring it into Unreal, but let's just
Sweet.
go over how you exported it out. So that's just like is that a plugin or anything?
Yeah, so like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we were using the Houdini Labs
Okay, so
tools.
that was it right there. That
Yeah,
was what you were talking about. Okay, cool.
yeah. This was the only thing that we needed to get the particles out of Houdini and ready for Unreal.
So that
Um,
was your right node. You exported it out,
yep,
and you exported it out. Okay, cool.
exactly. Yeah, and like I said, I did a bunch of things with tops just to automate the process of exporting each partition. But yeah, just to review, I wrote them out one partition at a time. Basically, one every 10 grain particles was kept, and then this Niagara node right here was used to get them ready in a format that Unreal likes. So a couple of cool settings is export start frame as frame 0. We always start. Oh shoot! Sorry, can you guys still hear me? Shoot.
Yeah.
Okay,
Still
sorry
here.
about that. Computer was doing some weird stuff. Anyways, start export start frame as time equals 0, and then which is helpful because we started at frame 1000, and then yeah, after that, this pretty much took care of the rest. Just HB JSON, that was the file format. I just had to hit render on my little top net over here, and it wrote all of them out, and then I just handed them off to you guys, and that was that on my end.
Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna cover this on the Unreal side. Um, so let me take over the screen. Well, dude, first of all, thank you. Let's play. I want to play your reel real quick.
Oh, thank you so much.
Uh, so let's see. Give me 1 second. So people could see some of your other work. And it's going to be choppy, so I recommend you guys check out the reel on Dakota's website. So check it out there, but I'll play it anyway. So give me 1 second. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you
very
so
nice reel. Really like it.
Yeah, and I highly recommend people look at it directly on the website so that it's not like second generation being restreamed, which gets a little
Pixelated.
and it's also because I have so much stuff open. It's also choppy on my end, so it's just highly recommend you just look at it on Dakota's website. So Dakota, I know you do have something at 3:30.
Yeah.
So if for whatever reason we run a little bit long, you could just, you know, get out of here and then we'll take it from here.
Yeah, that sounds great. I really appreciate it so much. Thank you guys again so much for having me here.
Yeah, you
No,
don't have to
thank
go
you
right
for
now.
being
Just
here.
whenever
Yeah.
you
No,
wanna
yeah,
go, just let us know. Okay.
for sure.
Okay. So on the Unreal side, we're gonna kind of do the same thing that Dakota was talking about, where we're gonna show the first way of doing it that turned out to be problematic, and then our workaround. So there's two things here. First thing is we needed to get the geometry inside, so the ground itself. And what we've noticed, which is very poorly documented, is there is an Alembic file limit in Unreal
Oh,
that
it's super poorly
no one
documented.
really mentions, right? And
Yeah.
I kept looking for it, and it was on one like forum thread. One of the developers said, "Oh yeah, there is a file limit. It's around 2.4 gigs, 2.1 gigs." Right? So it doesn't really say that in the Alembic help files or whatever, but that seems to be the number. Sometimes you get lucky, it goes to 2.4. Sometimes you don't get lucky and it'll crash at like 1.9 gigs, but there is actually a
A
file
size
size
limit.
limit.
And an Alembic size file that's 2 gigs is not actually not very big.
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
so
that's not big at all.
no, it's not a big size for Alembic. You have to think about storing all the animation across, like, it could be hundreds of frames. So that's why those file sizes are larger than bringing in like a single model.
Yeah, and the thing about Alembics to keep in mind, it's essentially a series of blend shapes. So in our case, let's say on like the girls on our thing, like they have like the bead necklaces. That ends up being one of the heaviest things because it's those beads duplicated times the number of frames you have. It becomes a crazy poly count, right? So the default Alembic plugin is just your Alembic importer, and that's the ideal way of bringing stuff in. You just go to File, Import, select your Alembic, bring it in as a skeleton, throw that into your sequencer, and link the animation. That's the most stable way of working.
Yeah.
But again, you have a 2.1 gig limit. So anything past that, you have to use this thing called the geometry cache from Alembic Experimental. It's very experimental. This thing is very, very, very unstable. And talk about lack of documentation. There was nothing on this that I could find at all. There was one thread of someone that said, "How do you do this?" No one answered her. And then she wrote back saying, "I figured it out." But she didn't explain how she figured it out. So I reached out to her. She's like, "Oh yeah, I'll let me gather my notes and I'll send them to you." And 4 months later, I realized that she wasn't going to email me back. So we had to figure out how to how to do this. Okay, so uh, the way you want to do this is you got to go in here and go to your blueprint class, uh, and then you would come to ABC, and then you go to geometry cache file actor. Okay, you would load this thing in and you could just name it whatever you want. In this case, I have it over here already. Okay, once you have that, if you select it, it's not really going to do anything. Your detail panel is not really going to show you anything. So you have to drag this guy into your sequencer. So your animation level. And here you can see I have it under ground. I just named it ground. And let's just do a copy of it here. So just get rid of it. And we'll just drag it in here. And we'll name it ground.
This could crash at any moment.
Yeah, this is like I literally messaged Tran right before this, and I'm like, there's a high probability this is going to crash, so have an alternate file ready to go. Okay, so we have it here. Now we have to go to our details, and you can see that it says Alembic file path. Here, you would search your Alembic file path, so ground interaction. Okay, give it a minute.
And this is where it could
This
crash.
is like an 80% chance we're gonna crash, right? When this loads up, and this is, I think it was 9 gigs. That again, that's not a big file. So you can see immediately it is telling you start frame 1000, end frame 1309. Now, that doesn't mean you have to offset your animation to frame 1000 in order for this to work. All we have to do is we come over here to our ground track, make sure you're at your starting frame, geometry cache. Okay, and you can see right away it links it to your geometry cache.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the setting is pretty simple. It's just a matter of how stable it runs.
Yeah. So once you have that there, the other problem you're going to have, let me just delete this here, is a lot of times you're not going to see this thing in the viewport at all, right?
Sometimes it pops up.
Sometimes it pops up, sometimes it doesn't, but it's there. And that's what makes it extremely difficult to work with, is you're like, hey, how the hell do I know if this is even working if I can't even see it in the freaking viewport, right? So just give me 1 second. I'm going to.
The other thing is sometimes I did do render tests trying to do this this streaming technique where when it's streaming it, it's not actually ingesting it into Unreal, right? So when you import Alembics that are underneath 2 gigs,
And I crashed.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there you could see the problem. It's okay, because the point that I was going to get to is we found this method to be
Unbearable.
ridiculously unstable.
Yeah.
When I say an 80% chance that it's going to crash, it means 80% chance at this second, but it's going to crash in like 5 minutes, right? Like you're going to crash.
Oh, it's 100%.
Yeah, it's 100% you're going to crash. It's when you're going to crash is the issue. So with a 9 gig file, you have a 100% chance you're going to crash at a certain point within 10 minutes, right? So we actually had an Alembic done by another great student, but it was 500 gigs. So forget about it. There was zero probability of it working. So we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to get this thing to work? And the only way that we were able to get this thing to work is to grab that Alembic file and basically bring it into Maya
And chop it up.
Chop it up into 2.1 gig sections. So
Yeah.
Tran, do you want to
So
show that?
let me pull the screen. So as I was saying, like if you import an Alembic that is underneath 2 gigs, it becomes part of Unreal. And then it doesn't have a problem loading it because it's ingested. When you're streaming, it's not part of Unreal. It's reading outside of the project, which I don't think Unreal is really used to working that way. That's why it has issues.
Yeah.
So I kept crashing so much. And then what I did was I couldn't stand it.
Which, by the way, is the way Alembic files work on almost every program. It's not brought into the actual program
because
itself.
they're too large and
It's
too
externalized. And I think where Unreal crashes is that it tries to convert this Alembic file into its own thing, its own proprietary thing. And I'm assuming that's where it's crapping out.
Yeah. So I couldn't stand to deal with that. What I did, and I didn't know if this was going to work because this would not work in Maya very well at all, actually, was I took the Alembic, and you can see here I have 3 objects. So I broke them up to A, B, and C, and they were based on frame range, right? So the first one was like 1000 to 1097. Next one, it was 1098 to 1136. So you can see it's just broken up according to time. And then I ditched whatever last frames I didn't need because there was no actual movement from that point or change in the actual mesh. This would not work in Maya. You could technically turn off Alembics and then have one visibility show back up. But the problem is I would have motion blur problems. So the way that I've always worked in Maya when I'm dealing with Alembics are not geometry cache, meaning it's the same mesh over time, it doesn't change, is the motion blur will be calculated within that mesh. So if I turn on one Alembic file and then the other one, turn that off in one frame and then turn the next one that looks the same, there will be no motion blur calculation between two different meshes. So that's why I didn't think that this was going to work. But it works amazingly well. So what I've been doing a lot in my scenes is I've been stitching together Alembic files. So this first one here, you can see it's playing along this frame range. Let's just show it here. Right, so I have my first mesh. You can see it's selected. And once it starts transitioning into the second mesh, which is over here, I have the visibility of the first mesh turned off. So you can see that this red part indicates it's off, the green indicates it's on. So now I have my second mesh playing. And then I have, as I get towards the end, the third section. And the way I decided to break it up was just according to size. So each one is about 2 gigs. And that's why it's broken up that way. So that actually worked really amazingly well, and it plays really stable, and you can see I'm not crashing out on that. Yeah, but it's pretty amazing, even with its limitations that I'm saying, you know, it should be able to load it, but we can find workarounds, which is by stitching it. And if I show you just kind of the breakdown of what's going on in my scene here, and I think Miguel should kind of discuss the Niagara.
I'm going to show the Niagara stuff, but I'm opening this.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over this because Miguel is the one who ingested Dakota stuff. So what I have in this scene here, if I just hide a lot of these Niagara fog effects, give me 1 second here, and let's hide the decal. Here we are. So I have a lot of stuff hidden. And let's hide the system too, so we can see the passes here. And I'll also hide the blood. Okay. So the simulation starts, well, the shot actually starts more towards the end. The first part of the scene I have here is just pretty empty. And I'll just play it from here. Okay, hold on.
It's so pixelated that you don't see a lot of stuff, but it's all there.
Yeah. So you can see the mesh part. It's being dug in. To kind of pull that out a little bit more, what I did is I added a decal. Let's pull it on this frame. And all it did is make the areas where it gets pushed in more wet. So for that, if I show you what the decal is doing, let's see here. My camera speed is really slow. Here we are. You can see my decal boxes. Now they're placed really low. If I pull them up, you can see what that's doing. It's basically just making the areas darker and a little bit more wet. Let's jump back into the camera. And then you can see what that does is kind of push that out. Now, once I have that, I turn on the particles that Dakota created. And Miguel will show you how he got the rocks in here. But you can see here, I have to play it from the beginning or else it doesn't play right. So let's play the shot from the beginning. I have my decals and we got the nice rock scattering on top there. And then we have the blood. And I also did the same thing with the blood. So I broke the blood up into 2 sections and it was based according to size, right? And visibility will turn off when it hits the end of the frame rate. The other things that I did on top of this was I just faked some Niagara stuff on top. So these are all my Niagara smoke effects that will trigger base when it hits on certain actions, right? So wherever you see where it's red, based on that action, like for example,
Those Those are triggers.
Yeah. The first time it falls, it crashes. I don't have them on. Let me turn them on. And it will look very smoky because I'm in the middle of a one life cycle. So you can see here, one of my first ones that triggers is this one.
You
And
kind of have the screen hidden. Yeah.
yeah, there you go. As it hits that, you can see the smoke will start playing. And once it leaves a certain amount, it will end the life cycle. If I leave it here, it's just going to keep pumping out fumes,
Yeah, that's funny.
which is really weird. But because I'm in the middle of that life cycle. But once I exit the life cycle in the sequence, it will stop playing. So for it to play properly, we'll just play through.
Let me make that bigger.
And let's try it again. It will never play right if I play in the middle of anything because they're based on timing and life cycles and stuff like that.
You definitely see the floor stuff that Dakota did much more when it's not pixelated like Pac-Man. It's so the final film, when you guys will see it, it's not going to look.
Pixel, yeah, you'll appreciate much more. It's one of those things anyway. Like if you show like the old edit, it's really obviously that there's no interaction with the floor. So you definitely really feel it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So I got this running again if you want to pass it to me.
Yeah, go ahead, take over.
Okay, so pretty simple to get it in once you know how to do it. But basically, Dakota gave me these, what are they? What's this format again? HB JSON files. And just drag them into Unreal. Bring them in just like anything else, but you have to get this plugin running from GitHub, which you could just look at it on. You should get the link directly from. Well, let me just see if I can put this here. Where is it? So we got it from there. So you should get it from there. That way you're not downloading some weird things. This is directly from the Houdini guys. Download this thing, and it allows you just to drag in these file formats, okay? So all you do at that point is we basically just went in and went to effects, and I just created a Niagara emitter. Okay, so we just go to our new emitter. You're not going to see it here when you look for it. So you want to turn off library only. You still might not see it. So Houdini. And then you're going to see Houdini Niagara Basic. Okay. Come over here. Go to finish. Let's just call this something like new. Okay. Right click, create Niagara system. Okay. So there it is, your new system. And there we have this guy here. So let me open one that I've already got working. I believe it might be this one. No, it's A. So we got them working, but it's on Tran's computer. So this one I just did real quickly. Okay, so let me close this here. So all you really have to do is pretty straightforward. You just have to, first thing, one of the things we notice, and this is something that we just haven't done enough back and forth to get it completely down, is the scale was slightly off. Not slightly off, it was off by a bit, but it wasn't a big deal. We could just manually scale it. However, when I tried to scale it inside of the viewport, it wouldn't scale. So you have to make sure that under your properties that you turn on, where was this? Local space. And this allowed us to scale this thing in the viewport, okay? So if we didn't have that thing turned on, we weren't able to scale this guy in the viewport. So anyway, so that was number one. The second thing we had to do, just come over here and we're just gonna scroll down. And you could see that we have these Houdini Niagara slots. So all you basically have to do is come over here. Here we have our grains, right? It's actually this one that we ended up using, and just drag it into there. Scroll down here, you see that again, drag it into there. And there's 3 slots. Just drag each one of your JSON files into it. And at that point, it should start looking correct, okay? Right now, it's currently working as a sprite. So we ended up setting this up to be geometry. So we went to mesh renderer, okay? When you go to your mesh render, you just come over here to your meshes, and you could find anything you want. So here I had like my mega scan rocks. So let's just come over here. And I had, let's see, small rocks. You can see they're small rocks, but they're not tiny in terms of the poly count. They're up there. They're not showing up here. Let's see.
You have to double click it and then it will load, but it might take a while.
Yeah, so little guys like this, you know, they're up there. If you see the nanite triangle, it's 1 million polygons, right? Like that's nuts. So grabbing those guys, let's come back over here. Go to our meshes. And dragging it into there, okay? So I already did it on this one, but you can see just drag it in there. And next thing we need to do is we're gonna go into our particle spawn, and we're gonna just create an initial mesh orientation and just set that to random. That way all the rocks are kind of randomized, or the grains, whatever you want them to be. If not, first time we did it, we didn't have this turned on, and it just looked like he was creating these perfectly aligned rocks, and it looked really weird. So that was a big thing. So making sure that you do that, and that's very simple. Just come over here, initial mesh orientation, and that's it. And you have to do that under your particle spawn. Okay. The other thing we ended up doing was, I believe it was this one here. No, that was fine. I think that was the only thing I actually ended up doing.
It's
Yeah.
pretty important though, because if you don't attach meshes, it just spits out little balls. So
Yeah.
little sprites, they're just cards. So the the orientation of it is very important. Otherwise they look like the same rock over and over.
Okay,
in
there
the
is one
same
more thing I
rotation.
did do, yeah. So under initialize particle, I just went in there and set it to be a random vector. And then here you can see we have our minimum and maximum size. That way all the random range float, sorry. And then we ended up just doing that so that we have a random scaling. So all the rocks are not the exact same size. This is not the final one that we ended up doing, because we ended up having 2 different emitters, and both of them have different scales. But that was it. Once you did that, you just drag that guy into your.
I think Dakota's got to jump.
Yeah, go for it, Dakota.
I'm so
Thank
sorry
you for-
about that. Thank you
No, it's
both so
okay.
much
Thank
for
you
having
so
me
much
on.
So
for
Dakota's
being
got
on
a
the
job
show.
interview, so everybody wish him luck.
Yeah, I'm sure you're
Thank
gonna
you
do
so
awesome.
much.
Get
I
the
really
job.
appreciate it. Thank you so much. You guys have a great rest of the stream, and I'll see you guys around. And thank you,
Thanks,
everybody
man.
who came.
Bye, Dakota.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so let's all wish Dakota good luck. I'm sure he'll get it. So just drag that system into your sequencer. Okay, so let's just do it right here. Give me 1 second. Drag that guy in there. And then we would just go to track, Niagara component, track, Niagara life cycle. That's where it's going to start. So you want to make sure that you align that to wherever it should start in the animation. In this case, it was right here. So now you know that as soon as the timeline hits this frame here, it's going to start the sequence. Okay, so we come over here, play it. Now keep in mind that I have the streaming Alembics here.
So it's probably
So
going
it
to crash.
could crash, but it'll play.
The other problem is when you stream the Alembic, sometimes it drops the frame. So if you're rendering, like literally the mesh disappears. Well, you can see it disappeared there, but it does disappear in the actual render.
And you can see the particles look like they're not linking up correctly. They are. You're just not going to see it until you render. And I think this has more to do with the Alembic streaming. Like it just bogs the entire system down. But it's working. The particles are just being triggered late inside of the viewport. But again, if you were to render this, it would be completely fine.
Yeah, but that's really frustrating when you're trying to light it.
Yeah, because all of a sudden the real-time component of it, as you can see, it is no longer real-time. So now you do have to render anything in order to see if it works.
Yeah, and I think the workaround we have works. It's it still like limits you in size though, because you don't really want to have 100 like files for a chopped up Alembic. That would,
yeah, like
that
for
would be very
example,
difficult.
we had a whole other thing that we wanted to do, which was inside the cave hole have this like blood coming out of these cracks. And the Alembic that we got was 500 gigs. It looked great, but in order for us to get that to work, we would have to cut it into 250 files and then layer each one of them perfectly. It would just take an eternity to do. So we had to just, we just can't use that. So something to keep in mind, something that I hope Unreal solves, because
9 gigs is not huge.
9
it's
gigs
actually
is not huge. Yeah.
It's actually very small. So
yeah, and here's the other issue that we've had, and there might be a workaround for this, but right now, like I said, this one is streaming. I wish there was a way to say, hey, you know what? Chill out, don't stream right now. Just show me one frame. That way I could get the shaders to look good. I could get the lighting to look good, and then just kind of do your Alembic thing at render time. But we can't seem to do that. So as soon as we start trying to move the timeline to see, the camera's position or whatever, you can see down at the bottom, streaming geometry cache.
And then it could crash when it's
going through all the frames to get to frame number 12. And then that's where it could crash out, because it'll just run out of memory if the Alembic cache is too big. So, yeah.
Yeah. We have a question here, which I think is a very interesting question. Have you guys looked into vertex animation textures in Unreal for bringing in certain effects from Houdini? We have not tried that, but that is a very interesting thing to look into.
Yeah. So anyway, the cool thing is we got it to work. It looks cool. We got everything finally in and looking good last night, and we're still going to probably mess with it a little bit more. But yeah, so you can do it. It definitely looks really cool when you see it in the shot. And yeah, that's basically the Houdini to Unreal pipeline in a nutshell. There's still, again, the Alembic stuff, there's a lot to be desired on that side. And
hopefully that gets worked out.
Yeah, but the other stuff is pretty good. So I'll show you one other thing that is pretty exciting. Let me save this real quick. Give me 1 second. I believe this is it. So started to work with an artist that we really like called David Planeta. I don't know if that's his real name or that's his artist name, but it's an artist that we really like, and he designed this poster that we're still working on, but pretty happy with how that's looking. It looks pretty beautiful. Amount of detail he's put into this thing, and a lot of thought he's put into it. Like pretty impressive. Like if you just look at it, it just looks like a cool poster, but there's a lot of thought to it. He saw the movie, so everything has a purpose to it, and yeah, we're very happy with it.
Yeah.
And it's not done, so
He's gonna make it really even more detailed.
so it'll have like, you know, the poster credits in the bottom, but we want to keep it as simple as possible. It feels kind of like charcoal. It's all digital. It's all in Photoshop, and yeah, I just completely love it. So it is minimalistic in its way. It's the color palette obviously doesn't match our film at all, but I think tonally it does, especially once you see the whole film. So yeah, super happy with it. And yeah, that's it. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks Dakota for being badass and getting this done. And yeah, thanks to Gnomon, thanks to Alex for making this possible, and for you guys streaming, watching the stream. Yeah, thank you so much. So
we will be here next week.
Does anybody have any questions before we go? If you want to follow any of our work, you can follow us at halfemptystudios. Not.com. Half Empty Studios on Instagram. That's where we usually post any updates or whatever. And hopefully we'll be able to announce the premiere of the film at Gnomon very soon. So yeah, we're at the finish line. So we're technically done on our side. Right now we're just improving the shots.
Oh, we still have one big shot.
Yeah, but it's there. It's just improving it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting it as good as we can.
Yeah, and the sound designers already have it. The music is locked. So right now it's just the sound design, final touches, and sound mix. So yeah, that's it. Anyway, thank you guys.
We will be here next week, and have a good day.
Yeah, let me kick this off with, where is it? All right, see you guys.